Welcome back to Grain IQ. I'm your host, Chad Moyer. Grain marketing is a critical piece of keeping your operation profitable. And here on Grain IQ, we strive to help you better understand the markets. This podcast is a joint project between the Nebraska Rural Radio Association and the Nebraska Soybean Board. On today's program, we welcome Ken Hellevang. He is with North Dakota State University. He is an extension engineer and a professor there at NDSU. Ken, thanks for visiting with us here today. First of all, before we talk about, today's topic I should introduce is grain storage. What is the value of grain storage, not only to your operation, but to your marketing plan as well? Ken, before we talk about that, maybe just give us a little bit of background about you and your career there at NDSU.
Well, it has been a long career, I guess, at this point. I've been here at NDSU now for 44 years. And so over that time frame, I've been working in the grain drying and storage area over that whole 44 years and seen quite a transition over those years. Started out doing a lot of small grains in North Dakota. That then expanded to more of wheat and small grains through the Upper Plains region, Minnesota, South Dakota, North Dakota, and a little bit into Montana. And then as corn and soybeans worked into the northern region, started working more and more with corn and soybeans as well. Another trend that we have seen is that there's less engineers working in the grain drying and storage arena. So my territory has continued to expand and do quite a bit of work with Nebraska. And I say kind of at this point, my territory, if you want to use that term, is from coast to coast. So I find my background in ag and biosystems engineering has fit the responsibilities very well, given me kind of the background and then the experience and the research that has been done to hopefully provide some guidance in the grain drying and storage arena for a number of years.
Yeah. Ken, I always find it interesting how you folks in extension, how you find your specialty or you find that thing that you're going to focus on. Was there something early in your career? How did you decide that grain storage was going to be something that you focused your time and efforts on?
Well, I was hired to work in the grain area in 1980 when I came to North Dakota. Um, the kinds of products that we've worked with vary over the years, but I find it, like I said, that my background as an ag engineer, we're kind of taught both the physical sciences as well as the biological sciences. So the more that we know about grain or the products that we're working with, the better job we can do of the engineering aspect, providing the right conditions and understanding the heat and moisture transfer. And what I've found over the years is there's always been plenty of questions that need answering to keep me energized and focused in this arena.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's jump right into it here, Ken. From a philosophy standpoint, in an ability to market grain, if you had to say, what is the value of having your own grain storage, bins at your disposal and the equipment to move grain, what is the value of that asset to a grain operation, would you say?
This is an area that I've focused on quite a bit over pretty much my whole career. When I started, I kind of oversimplify things, but with small grains, we were waiting for the wheat or barley to dry in the field. And then we needed enough combines and trucks and people in order to get that harvested before the next rain shower came or other problems occurred. What we've kind of changed focus on is that if we have the ability to harvest more when we want to harvest, we greatly increase the efficiency of that operation. Rather than waiting for wheat to dry to 13% moisture, if we can start combining that wheat at 16, 17%, do some farm drying and storage, that greatly increases the number of hours and even days that are available for harvesting the grain. It gives us the ability to get the grain off the field before we start seeing deterioration due to successive rain events or other problems. As we've shifted into corn and soybeans, that same thing is true. Probably the Corn Belt had done a better job of thinking of a harvest window than what some of us in the Midwest had done. But if we can start combining corn at 20% moisture, do a little bit of drying, that greatly enhances the ability to manage our harvest. And with equipment being so expensive and labor being a challenge, the ability to have a handling system, a drying system that allows us to harvest over a wider window, you might say, that greatly improves our efficiency. And the other thing that used to happen was people would haul directly to the elevator, and then you'd sit in line waiting for your turn to dump. Well, with the harvest today, we really want to do a very efficient harvest operation. So we'll typically harvest, bring it home to our home farm, put it in storage for a period of time. We may have, marketed that grain already, but we'll store it for a period of time and then deliver as called upon. So there's many ways that it's difficult to actually put a dollars and cents on it, but the ability to have the drying and storage handling system greatly improves our on-farm economics and efficiency.
Yeah, absolutely. Hadn't thought about it from the efficiency standpoint at time of harvest, but then you even think about after that, Ken. Once you have the grain in storage, then you can really watch things like basis and if there's carry in the market and things like that. You these cents start to add up, and you can improve the average price of the grain that you sell. Right?
Absolutely. And typically what I hear, farmers will have maybe anywhere from 50 to maybe 80% of their production forward contracted, but there's still that portion that ends up being open market. And like you indicated, the opportunity to see the typical price patterns during a year, uh, the ability to harvest and store maybe even for a month or two. Yes, there's a cost associated with the bins and the capital investments and all those things. But typically, as you pencil it through, there's an economic advantage to be having that flexibility to market as the market would dictate.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, let's talk about doing that. If obviously, like you said, usually there are a bunch of bushels that go to market right at harvest, but there's a fair amount that goes into bins as well. Um, Ken, what do you think is the economic impact of keeping grain in good condition while it's in storage. How important is that? How much does that affect the bottom line?
That greatly affects the bottom line. We're typically going to have, the best quality of grain at harvest. And then our goal in storage is to maintain that quality. And if we're going to get the best dollar when we do market it, it needs to be delivered in good quality. And so any deterioration that occurs during the time that that grain is sitting in storage, that's going to be a penalty that you pay. And I kind of have this story that I tell over and over again, that farmers will invest so much effort into the production of the grain, whether it's selecting the seed, knowing the right soil fertility, all the disease problems and everything else that they deal with. All of that is investment, both financial and what you might call mental investment, is in the storage. And so it makes a lot of sense to do what we can in storage to make sure that we're able to get the best return on all of that investment. And that comes with following the recommended practices, particularly in our region. We have weather climate that we can utilize to help maintain the grain in storage as long as we're applying that expertise appropriately.
Yeah. Well, let's expand on that a little bit more. Once grain has gone into the bin, Ken, what are some of the best management practices? What are some of the things that you recommend farmers should do? Because, I think there's a danger. It's out of sight, it's out of mind. But you do have to watch that. So what are some of the things that you suggest we should do in order to keep that grain in good condition?
Well, there's two primary things that we have control over. One is the grain moisture content, and the other is the grain temperature. And they're both critical in maintaining the quality of that grain. Most people, have grown up knowing that grain has to be dry in order to store. But we can fudge a little bit on that with cold temperatures. We can store maybe a little bit on the damp side. And the example that I use, we'll talk about corn. Corn is marketed at 15% moisture or 15 and a half. That's the standard bushel. But in today's economic environment with marketing, generally most of the buyers are looking for a 14% moisture. The reason that we transitioned to that was that as we started shipping that grain around, we found that 15% is not dry enough at the warmer temperatures. And so I tell people to think of a storage temperature and then identify the right moisture content for that temperature. So corn, yeah, we can store that over winter at 15, 16% moisture. No problems expected, no deterioration in quality. But anything that's going to be going into the warmer spring months and into summer months really needs to be down at that 13 to 14% moisture. That is what's required to prevent the mold growth from occurring. The other aspect, and that would be true with pretty much all of our crops. Soybeans, we can store 13, which is the market moisture, over winter. But if we're going to store into summer, and we're going to see that more as we see more crush plants and summer demands for that soybean, then that really needs to be down into 11, maybe at most 12, but probably closer to 11% moisture. When we talk about temperature, we've known for years that it's critical for us to cool the grain as outside temperatures cool. And so having an aeration system, so as winter temperatures come in, we're able to run that aeration system. If you're in North Dakota, we take it down to in the 20 to 30 degree range. In southern states where we don't have that ability, typically we say it has to be down below 40 if at all possible. If we go into spring and summer, the goal still should be to keep that grain cool as we can. And so in the spring, doing what we can to run a fan to remove the heat that might be accumulating in the top of the bin, monitoring that bin. Actually, there are several things that we can do. We should cover fans. We should make sure that we're monitoring the temperatures, do it whatever we can to remove that solar heat gain on the top of the bin. That's going to help us store the grain and reduce the likelihood of insect infestations. So there's really two parameters, moisture content and temperature, that requires the farmer or manager to be monitoring and adjusting during that storage season.
All right, interesting stuff. Well, that'll have to do it for part one of our conversation on grain storage with Dr. Ken Hellevang. He is a professor and extension engineer in the Department of Agricultural and Biosystems Engineering at North Dakota State University. Coming up in part two of our conversation with Ken, we'll talk a little bit more about advancements in grain storage and how you can use this information in your risk management plan. That's it for today's episode of Grain IQ. I'm your host, Chad Moyer.
Grain IQ is a production of the Nebraska Rural Radio Association with support from the Nebraska Soybean Board. It is brought to you in part by Nebraska soybean farmers and their checkoff. Grain IQ is hosted by Chad Moyer and produced by Rebel Saklocha. It is written and edited by Alex Makovica. Our project manager is Bryce Duskett. You can listen to Grain IQ on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or online at ruralradionetwork.com.